Okay, so Anna, take me back to your first pregnancy and tell me when you were pregnant with your first child, what did you know about birth and what kind of a birth were you planning to have with that baby?
I feel like I had been emotionally preparing for birth my whole life. I always wanted to be a mom. When kids grow up saying that they want to grow up to be a lawyer or a doctor, I was like, I can't wait to be a mom. That's all I want. So for many years, I had researched how I wanted, like how when you're little, you dream of your wedding. I always imagined like what my births would be, and I always thought that I would have a natural birth. I never imagined myself having a home birth. For some reason, that always scared me. But I did imagine not having an epidural and, having like for my first birth, like maybe 10, 12-hour labor, and that it was going to be really difficult, but I was going to be so empowered and I was going to be able to push my baby out, and then my baby would come out and I would just have this beautiful, perfect baby. And then I would be walking around, the next day and everything would be fine, sort of like what we all dream our births to be.
I love
Um,
that.
yeah, that's what I had. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what we all hope for, right?
Yeah. So then it sounds like with your first pregnancy, you went with like traditional prenatal care, hospital birth plan.
I did, yeah. I actually found this really great women's center that has midwives and OBs that work together. And so I was able to have what I wanted was more on the midwife side, but still with more of like a medical, like OB supervision,
Mhm.
which ultimately ended up being exactly what I needed.
Okay. So is there anything about that pregnancy or about your prenatal care that you feel like you want to talk about or that is relevant to your story before we talk about that first birth experience?
My pregnancy was really I don't want to say easy because pregnancy is not easy, but it was very normal and healthy. I did experience really intense pelvic pain with all of my pregnancies, but I don't know if that really has much to do with the way my labors ended. But yeah, it was a nice smooth pregnancy. Everything was perfect.
All right. So why don't you take us to going into labor and tell us about that first birth experience?
So I went into labor. I got woken up. I believe, 3 days past my due date. And I got woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning with like very much a very obvious contraction. Very different than the Braxton Hicks contractions that I had been feeling before. It like woke me up and I was like, oh gosh, this is happening. And then right away, my contractions were 10 minutes apart. At no point did they let up. In fact, they continuously got closer and closer together. But I was able to labor at home for, I think it was like 14 hours until the pain just got like too unbearable. I wanted to be home as much as I possibly could, but the pain got a little too much and I needed help. And unfortunately, with my first, I had really bad back labor. And then, based on the way that he was positioned, he was sunny side up. And I guess maybe my anatomy didn't help, but he was putting a lot of pressure on my tailbone. And so, with every contraction, it felt like my tailbone was breaking. It was really, really intense. And then, even in between contractions, that tailbone pain didn't let up. And so, I didn't really feel like I had much of a break, even in between contractions. So, that got really intense. And then I went into the hospital and I was checked. I was having contractions at that point every 2 minutes and they were intense. And so I went into the hospital thinking, like, I'm going to get there and it's going to be like 8 centimeters and it's going to be so close to pushing. Like, I for sure thought that it was go time. And I got there and they checked me and I was at 1.5. And they were like, well, we can't even admit you. And because of my tailbone pain, I couldn't sit down at all. And so the car right there was excruciating. So I was like, well, I'm not going home because I'm not getting back in the car. They were like, okay, well, you can walk around the hospital. I walked around the hospital for a little bit and they could see like how intense my contractions were. So after about 45 minutes, they checked me again and I had progressed to a 7.
Wow.
So it was like moving quickly at that point. Then they got me finally, then they got me admitted. They gave me some, I don't remember what pain medication they gave me. It was some oral pain medication. which made me really droopy, but it didn't really take any of the pain away. Um, and then, but I was able to rest a little bit. Then I had wanted to get, the hospital here has these like beautiful, like deep tubs. And that's like one of the reasons I wanted to go there so bad, because I wanted to be in the water. And so as we were like preparing to get me in the water, my contractions were so close together that I couldn't really move very well. Um, and so the midwife was like, I don't know if it's really a good idea for you to try to climb up with how bad your tailbone is hurting, for you to try to climb up and then like down into the tub, like might hurt you worse. And then at that point, since I was progressing so fast, they were like, well, now you kind of have to decide if you want an epidural or not. And at that point, I couldn't do it. I think that I don't know. Hindsight is 2020, right? Like I feel like now if I hadn't had my tailbone pain, that maybe I could have gone farther, because that was probably the most intense. Like every contraction just felt like I was gonna like explode out of the back.
Ugh.
um, I know it's not funny now. I mean, it's funny now, but it wasn't at the time. But yeah, I just thought that in the moment, I just thought that that was what I needed to do. It felt really defeating because I had these dreams of being able to give birth naturally. But at that point, I just knew I needed it. And so I accepted having an epidural. It was really great. I was able to get a nap in, it worked right away. Um, After that, I was like, oh, this is why people tell you to get an epidural, because this is awesome. Now I can finally enjoy my labor. And shortly after that, they came and checked me and they were like, well, now you're not really progressing very fast. And so we would like to give you Pitocin and break your water. And at that point, I was like, this is why I didn't want to get an epidural, because then this is when all the other things start coming up, like all the other um, interventions, and things start coming up that I knew I didn't want. Um, Ultimately, I decided to let them break my water, but I did not accept Pitocin. And after they broke my water, I was able to rest for a little while, but then I was woken up by like a whole team of nurses that came in that saw that my son's heart rate was dropping really bad. And normally, I guess babies' heart rates are like between 130, 160, something like that. And his was going down to 60 every time I had a contraction. So they all came in the room to try to get me to switch positions, and maybe would work for like one contraction and then they would drop again and then they would switch me and then same thing. And after a little bit, they just realized that there was obviously something pinched. I think this is not something that they told me happened, but I think that after they broke my water, that maybe his cord got kind of sucked, pinched somewhere in there, because he was
Mhm.
very low. And without all that water cushioning, it had to have gotten pinched. That's what I think. So that's when they talked to me about doing a cesarean, and I didn't want to do it. And like we talked about, or like I mentioned to you, I had this dream of my birth of being just natural and beautiful, and I had planned it all in my head, but never once did I think that the possibility of cesarean was there. Like it just wasn't. It was like, that's not going to happen to me, so I don't have to worry about that. So I knew nothing about C-sections other than the few random stories that you hear of people saying the scary things, like this person had a C-section and they died because they bled to death or like something, so that was like in the back of my mind. So as soon as they said C-section, I was like, oh no, now I'm gonna die.
Oh,
And I
no.
was terrified because I knew nothing about it, but I knew that it was the safest thing for him. And so we went ahead for it. And as soon as they wheeled me into the OR, I remember it was so bright because I had the pain medication. Like, I don't even know what all they gave me. And then the epidural, I was so droopy. And the OR has to be so bright and it was so intense. But I remember as soon as they opened those doors, I had this like huge like weight just like lift. It was almost like they opened the doors and all my worries just like stayed in the room behind me. And I just had this like wave of just like, yes, like now I don't have to wait to meet my baby. Like now I'm going to be a mom like any second. And who cares about all the pain, and who cares that this is going to be a C-section, and like who cares that I've been worried this whole time. because now he's going to be safe. Like his heart rate is going to, they're going to take him out and he's going to be safe and I'm going to meet him and it's going to be amazing. And within 5 to 10 minutes, which that's another thing I didn't know, C-sections were so fast. 5 to 10 minutes after they got me in there, he was born and he was perfect. And I tapped on my husband's shoulder as he was coming out. I was like, he's perfect. And my husband was like, oh my God, he is. And he came on, he was all hairy and perfect. And
Oh,
after that, everything was great. The healing did take quite a long time, which is why I wanted to have a VBAC with my second, which I'm sure we'll get into in a minute. But because C-section healing was intense. I mean, I was healing from almost 24 hours of labor and then a C-section, that's major abdominal surgery. So it was a lot. But
yeah.
my baby was there and everything was fine.
So you're so interesting. So were you just able to just wholeheartedly let go of that dream, that birth that you had dreamed of even as a little girl? Like, or did you have any sense of grief or sadness that it didn't go the way that you had dreamed? Or take me to like how you processed that.
Well, when they were talking to me about the possibility of having a C-section, I broke down completely because it was like all of my lifelong dreams were just completely shattered and I had no idea that it was even going to hit me that hard. I mean, I didn't realize that that was an option, but it hit me so hard and I was scared of the possibilities of anything happening and really, really did not want to do it. And then as they wheeled me in the OR and I had that feeling of just like complete relief. And then after I saw him, and I would say the first, at least the whole time that we were in the hospital, the first couple of days, it was just complete bliss. I was like still pretty numb. So I wasn't really feeling like the repercussions of major abdominal surgery yet. And I was just so happy to see him and that he was safe. And nothing else mattered in that moment. And it wasn't until we came home and then a whole month or so of like really like bad pain. And that's when I was like really uh, taken back by the fact that like I hadn't gotten my birth that I wanted. And, all the things that come from like not getting what you want. Like part of me just kept reminding myself, like, the important thing is that he's safe, right? But and it is ultimately the only thing that really matters is that he's safe and that he's here and alive and, like no matter what, like that surgery is what brought him to me, so
Mhm.
I'm grateful for that. But yeah, you grieve the one thing that you didn't get, and still to this day, I mean, I've had 3 babies and I didn't get that one thing that I wanted with any of them, so
Mm.
it's hard.
Thank you for speaking to that. So you've already alluded that the next time you get pregnant, you want to try for a VBAC. So
Mhm.
tell us what is next for you in your journey with pregnancy and birth.
For the second, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we knew we wanted to have sorry, we knew we wanted to have kids close in age. And so when our first was 1, we started trying and we got pregnant right away. That pregnancy was also really smooth. Again, some pelvic pain, but other than that, just really healthy. And because my C-section had been due to the fact that my son's cord had gotten pinched somehow, or that his heart rate was dropping, it wasn't something like anatomically wrong with me. And so I was a really good candidate for having a VBAC. My midwife and OBs were all super supportive about the fact that I wanted to have a VBAC. In fact, they said that they thought that that was actually the safest. So I was really excited and hopeful again that I would finally have this like beautiful birth where I just push my baby out and everything's great. Um, and then I went into labor a week early, a week before my due date. And everything was really great. I labored at home again for, I think this time was probably like 5 or 6 hours. And then I got to the hospital. At that point, I think I was like 6 centimeters dilated, which again felt really great because the last time I had gotten to the hospital, I was only at a 1. So it felt really encouraging. But once again, I just kind of got defeated by the pain and chose to have a C-section. I mean, not a C-section, an epidural. And I was okay with that. I felt that I had I needed that rest to be able to push. I was like really, really excited and hopeful that I was going to be able to push my baby out. And I felt that if I had the epidural, I would be able to rest so that I would have energy and be able to push. I also went into labor with him like in the late afternoon. So I was like laboring throughout the night. I was exhausted.
Mhm.
um, so I had the epidural, everything was great. I was checked, I was at a 10, and it was time to push. I started pushing. I pushed for 2.5 hours, um, which again, I had no idea that that was even a thing. I thought you just like push a few times because that's all you see in the movies, you know? And I hadn't done it before. And so I had no idea how long it could take. I started getting scared, of course, that he wasn't coming out. But all of a sudden, you know how like when you're pushing, there's usually like a time in which your baby like is coming down the birth canal and you can like see more and more of the head, and then there's crowning and it kind of sort of just happens slowly, and then baby comes out, head comes out, then the next push, shoulders come out. That was not the case for me. I was just at the point after 2.5 hours that you could see his head, but that was it. um his head wasn't like coming down the birth canal, like you could just like barely see it. And then all of a sudden I felt like a release, and I just knew that he was coming like quickly. And so I said to my midwife, I said, he's coming right now. And he like shot out of me like all at once. My midwife like had to like weirdly catch him sort of midair because he just came out so fast. And it turns out that the reason that that happened is because so normally umbilical cords are supposed to be like 20 to 30 inches long. That's like a normal, like average umbilical cord. His was under 9 inches, like 8.5 inches. So it was really extremely short. Because of that, since he was attached to, you know, the cord, and then the placenta was attached to me, he wasn't able to come out for those 2.5 hours that I was pushing. And then the release that I felt was his cord actually like ripping. And so
Wow.
the cord ripped, he shot out of me. They put him on me for no longer than a minute. They realized right away that his cord had ripped because it was bleeding. And they were able to clamp his cord right away, but he lost blood because of that. And then I also was like bleeding out through the cord since the placenta was still attached to me. And then because he came out of me so fast, there was like no time for any stretching. And
Mhm.
so I was like severely injured down there. And yeah, so he was put on me for like, I don't think he was even on me for like a minute. And the nurses were just like rubbing on him. He kind of made some noise, but he didn't fully cry. I'm getting emotional already. And then they told me that he needed some help and that they had to put him on the little like, you know, that little table that they have on the side in the room. And I immediately knew that there was something seriously wrong. um, I had no idea at that point that his cord had ripped. They didn't tell me till like, I don't know, a few minutes later. At that point I had no idea what had happened, but as soon as they told me that he needed help, I knew there was something wrong, and I just kept asking, um, is he okay, is he okay? And they just said, he's he's breathing on his own, he just needs some help, but he's breathing on his own. And I just remember they just kept repeating that he's breathing on his own. I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? I'm asking if he's okay. Like, thank you that to tell, you know, that you're telling me that he's breathing, but like, I don't need you to repeat that. I just need you to tell me if he's okay. They didn't really know at the time, but they as like the minutes, it probably, I mean, this feels like forever to me, but it was probably only like within like 5 minutes, the room just like completely filled with people. There was a bunch of nurses coming in to help me, a bunch of nurses and doctors coming in to help him. I was completely like broken down crying because I knew there was something wrong, but no one would tell me anything. And then at the same time, I was like going in and out of consciousness myself. I didn't know at the time either how like severely injured. Oh, sorry. Go on. It's one of my sons. That's the one I said. What? I'm talking about right now.
That happens all the time. It's so crazy, Anna. Like, a woman will be telling her story and the baby wakes up or the kid walks in. I'm telling you, it's wow. I'm sorry that we got interrupted though, because you were at such an
Yeah,
intense
it's okay.
part of your story, but I think it's very cute that he just wandered in. I think I'm going to leave it in the recording actually.
Okay.
Okay, so my
Um,
gosh, I'm on the edge of my seat. You're going in and out of consciousness. You know something's wrong. They're not telling you, take me back to this birth.
yeah, I remember I just kept like coming to and then just like crying again because I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know at the time how severely injured I had gotten. And in fact, I remember asking my midwife if I had torn, and she was like, "Yeah," but she didn't want to tell me how bad. Um, but because of the fact that I had bled through the cord and then also my injuries, I later found out that I had lost like over half the blood in my body. So that's why I was going in and out of consciousness because I was losing so much blood. So there was all these nurses and doctors like trying to get me all stitched up, and then all these doctors trying to help my baby. My husband is, I just feel so bad for him. He had to see both of us just in the midst of that really, really intense situation. He even mentioned that both of us had our eyes open, but we were looking through him. Like we were looking at him, but like not at him because we were just, halfway there. And because his cord ripped, he had bled out. They noticed that his cord was ripped and they were able to clamp it right away. But with newborn babies, even the smallest amount of blood that they lose can be a really big deal. And so he didn't lose that much blood, but it was enough blood that that it, it was significant that he was what's the word I'm trying to think of, like not all there.
Mhm.
He wasn't like very responsive. And he was white, like pale, pale white. They were trying to help him out. At one point, they told me they had to take him to the nursery because he needed even more help. Um, and they didn't tell us this as it was happening, but when they took him to the nursery, they called the head of the NICU department at the OHSU hospital in Portland. We live like an hour and a half away from Portland right now, and we did at the time. But that is like the biggest, best hospital that's somewhere around us. So they FaceTimed with the head of the NICU department to assess him, and they told us that, or they told them that he did need to be sent there and he needed to be transferred. And they were afraid that because he had lost some blood, that there was lack of oxygen in his brain, and so they were afraid for brain damage for him. And so he was taken in an ambulance and transferred over to OHSU. Oh gosh. Um, and then thankfully they were able to get me transferred as well. But because I had lost so much blood, they had to do a blood transfusion on me before I was able to be transferred. So I had to stay at the hospital for a few hours before I was able to be transferred. Then I got sent on an ambulance myself over to OHSU. Um, sorry, my
That's
talk.
okay.
Um, and then when I got to OHSU, they tested my blood again, realized that I was still not doing good. So I had a second blood transfusion there. And because of my injuries, I wasn't able to sit up for a while. And so I was in this room all day, just getting like fluids and getting blood and just crying. I had no idea what was going on with my baby at the time because they just brought him over and they were like, we're just gonna do stuff like and then let you know. And my husband was there with him, and he was trying to send me updates, but he wasn't really even know what they were doing. They were just connecting him to all this stuff. He had IVs on both arms. He had an IV put in through his umbilical cord. He had an EEG connected to his head. So he had like 100 cables connected to his head. He had a CPAP on his face. He had to have all these different like blood tests done every couple hours or so. And so he was constantly being poked. He had a blood transfusion himself as well. And all of this was happening as I'm just like sitting in a room by myself, um, crying and like trying really hard to like sit up. And I couldn't sit up because I was so swollen and in so much pain. I remember asking a nurse if she would check to see like what was going on, because it felt like I had this like pillow that was like pressing up against me, and I thought it was one of those like awful like hard pads that they give you at the hospital. And turns out it wasn't. It was just how swollen I was. So that's just the feeling that I was having. It was just like so much like pressure. Finally that night I was able to force myself to sit up in a wheelchair and go see him. So I didn't get to see him. He was born at 7 in the morning, and I didn't get to see him again till like 1 o'clock in the morning the next morning. And I was in so much pain, but I didn't care. I just had to go see how he was doing. And I went down to the NICU, and that moment is so surreal because I was so happy to see him, but it's so heartbreaking to see your little tiny newborn like connected to so much stuff. And like they because oh, the other thing I forgot to say is because they were fearing um brain damage, and I guess because of the loss of his blood and the acidity level in his blood that was there, they wanted to make sure that wasn't going to cause any further damage. And so the treatment that they do for that is they do a cooling treatment. And so basically, they put the babies in these like cooling pads to lower their temperature, uh, like their core temperature, so that all of their organs will slow down and the brain will slow down, the blood slows down, and it gives them time to heal. It gives time for the blood to like replenish, and then they like slowly warm them up afterwards. So he was set to be cooled for 72 hours, and then another 24 hours after that, when they start like warming them up slowly. And then they have to check that entire time that he doesn't have any seizures, or they have to just keep checking, basically, just to make sure that I guess just to see what happens. So I show up to see him, and he's connected to all this stuff, and he's naked. The only thing he had was a diaper, and he's purple everywhere. Sorry, because he was so cold. And because that treatment is obviously so uncomfortable for babies to be cold, they have to keep them sedated. So he was thankfully asleep and not crying, but he was just so cold and so little and so cute. And he was connected to all this stuff. And so in that moment, I was so thankful that he was there and he was alive. But again, we had no idea what was happening. I just kept asking people like if he was going to make it. And they were like, yeah, but not very reassuring. And that's all I kept thinking was just like, if he, like, I just want to know that he's going to be alive, that he's going to make it through this. Um, I don't know why nobody was like really telling us anymore at the time. Um, so like I said, he had to be cooled for 72 hours, and then another 24 hours of like slowly warming him up, and then the EEG, making sure he didn't have any seizures. That whole time that he's being cooled, we can be there and we can hold his hand and talk to him, but we weren't able to hold him. He wasn't allowed to have a blanket on. He wasn't allowed to have clothes on, which is really, really heartbreaking to see a little newborn like that.
This
But
is
we
breaking
knew
my
that it
heart
was,
for you.
thank you. Um, we knew that it was the right thing for him, right? Like we kept talking about that the whole time. We were just, I mean, I think we cried for like nonstop for days, but we kept talking about it. Like, this is the right treatment for him. Like, this is what's keeping him safe. But it's heartbreaking to see him like that. So after 5 days of being of him being in the NICU, we finally were able to hold him for the first time. And that was incredible and just the best day ever. And I was able to try to feed him, because that was the other thing, because he was cooled and they didn't want his system to really be working much at all. Then he couldn't be fed. Um, so after day 5, I was able to start feeding him, which was really awesome. And he did a great job feeding. And they kept him there for a total of 7 days, which is actually not that long. When we first got there, they prepared us to be there for a month. They were like, well, this is kind of just usually how these things go, and just prepare yourself. This might be like a month, maybe longer. Thankfully, he was only there for a week, and he was just a total like fighter and champion. He made it through that like unscathed after all of that scary stuff. He had MRIs and all sorts of tests done, and he did wonderful with everything. And so he came out of the hospital. Thankfully, we were also able to stay at the Ronald McDonald House, because we live an hour and a half away, and I was so injured there was no way I could be like sitting anywhere. And of course, I was discharged from the hospital days before he was. And so thankfully we were able to stay, and the Ronald McDonald House was like right next to the hospital. So I was able to just walk right over every day and see him, which was great. And yeah, day 7, he was able to come home. And my healing from that experience was horrible. um, I don't really know like exactly what all happened, like how the damage was, but I was in pain, not even exaggerating, for like a year after his birth. And that was really another thing that was like physically and emotionally traumatizing about the whole thing. Like after the fear and the trauma of his birth, and after we came home, like I could feel a huge weight off my shoulders that like, yes, he's here and he's fine and he's not attached to anything. And getting him home was, oh my gosh, that was so hard. I looked at his foot, and you know how for newborn babies they have to like cut their little feet when they're gonna do blood draws, um, because they needed to check his blood so often in the hospital. They have to just constantly keep poking him and poking him. When I got home, I looked at the bottom of his foot and I counted 22 cuts
Oh no.
on his one foot. Um, yeah, that made me cry really bad. But he was safe and he was home and it was great. But then after that, being in pain myself for so long was like another reminder. And I think that like kept re-traumatizing me in a way, like remembering like everything that we had gone through. And then on top of it, like still like not feeling even close to normal myself. I didn't realize that um, a VBAC or like a natural birth could be that crazy. Apart from the scary things that happened with him and his cord being short and everything, I had no idea that tearing could or the tearing could be that bad, first of all, but also that that healing would be significantly worse from a vaginal birth
Hmm.
than a C-section.
Yeah,
I
no one
was
expects
pretty,
that.
yeah, no, I was thinking, I mean, that one of the main reasons I wanted a VBAC so bad is because my healing from my C-section was so intense. I was like, oh, there's no way that it would be worse than that. But
Wow.
it was a lot worse. I was in a lot of pain and didn't feel normal for a long time. It was awful.
Wow, I'm so sorry you went through that. You know, your story is one of those very rare, um, like freak sounding experiences where I can't really put my finger on a cause for that happening to you, and it just feels very, wow, just so unfair that you went through that.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think about that often. Like my my I get, I mean, not anyone in particular, but like basically everyone that I know just has these like beautiful birds. My sister-in-law had a home birth not too long ago, and it was just so smooth and beautiful. And like all her birds have just been so easy and no complications. And I like, that's all I ever hoped for myself, you know?
Mm.
And it seems like everyone around me just has like these beautiful birds, and mine were just like those first two. I don't I don't know. Yeah, like you said, I don't know why that happened to me, and why the both of those had to be so scary. And like you said, it's such a unique situation. Like his cord being so short is so unheard of. Like I've never heard of that happening to anybody else. Like I've never heard of a cord being that short or ripping during delivery. And it's one of those like one in a million things. And so
Yeah.
when we were thinking about the possibility of having another baby, that was my number one fear, was that we don't know why this happened. Because my first was a C-section. I don't know how long his cord was. Like maybe his was really short too, and it's like a genetic thing that I'm carrying or something, you know?
Mhm.
So that was a big fear of ours, which is why I decided to plan a C-section for my third.
Wow. That makes so much sense. My gosh. Okay, before we get into that story, I have
Yeah.
to know, I'm putting myself in your shoes like I often do when I'm listening to a woman's story, and I don't know that I would have the courage to get pregnant and, like, think about giving birth again. Like, can you talk a little bit about, like, when did you feel healed enough, and how did you find the courage to do this again? Can you take me to, like, sort of your emotional state and, like, when you sort of feel ready and, like, what was going on in your life?
Yeah, yeah. I after our second and that whole experience, even while we were in the hospital, my husband and I always thought that we wanted to have four kids. And so that was like in our plan, that as soon as one of them is, the first is one, we'll try for the second one. And when the second one is one, we'll try for the next. And that was kind of like our plan because we wanted them close together. And when our second was in the hospital and we were staying at the Ronald McDonald House, I looked over at my husband and I said, "We are never doing this again." He was like, "There's no way." And we had like officially decided that door was closed. Like, there's no way that we could ever put ourselves or a baby through something like that, like ever again. But as as time passes and your babies start getting older, and um, I don't know, just the thoughts started coming back of like maybe we could. And then in my head, again, going back to like dreaming of like the perfect birth, right? In my head, I just kept thinking, like, I want to have a good birth. Like, I can't end it like this, I
Yeah.
can't have that be like the last memory that I have of giving birth is like bad and then worse, you know?
Yeah.
Again, both of those took me to my babies. So I'm thankful and grateful for everything, but I can't have that be like the story of my births. And so I think that's probably what like kept encouraging me more. And also the thought of just having another baby. Like our babies are so awesome that when my husband and I would look at them, or when we would stay up late looking at pictures of them, that's all we kept thinking was like, we could do another one. Like, look how cute these are. And then we would see newborn pictures and baby fever hits.
Yeah.
And so we just decided that maybe we could do this. And the the cord getting pinched and heart rate dropping, like that's such a like 1 in 100 million, or I don't know how many, uh such a rare thing, so like not likely to happen again. A cord being so short, like again 1 in 1 billion, like who knows, I've never heard of that happening to anybody, but such a rare thing that probably wouldn't happen again. And so we could take the chance, and we started trying again, just being really hopeful that we could have the birth that we deserved. Or that's what I was thinking. um I don't know that I ever like really, I don't know that I ever really let um the fear um decide for me. I mean, in the moment, like right after he was born, I was like, there's no way that this is ever happening again. But the thought of having another baby, and the thought of like needing to prove to myself that I could do it, I guess. I think those thoughts felt more powerful to me than the fear of something wrong happening.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess that's how we ended up coming to that decision.
That makes sense to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
So tell me about this pregnancy and take me to the birth experience when you're ready.
Yeah, so there's actually another hiccup in the story, another trauma in the story. When we decided that we would were ready to do this again and that hopefully nothing else bad was going to happen, we decided to start trying. We got pregnant right away, thankfully. And 10 weeks, I had a miscarriage, which was on top of all the um, birthing stuff that had happened. One of those other things that I just like never thought I would be one of those. It's 1 in 4 women who miscarry, and or 1 in 4 pregnancies that end in miscarriage. And never in my life did I even think that that was a possibility for me until it happened. And I was really, really, really traumatized by that experience. Sorry. Um, but again, like I couldn't let that be like how my motherhood story ended. And so, and at that point we had like our hopes up so much of like having this other baby, and I wanted that baby so bad. Sorry.
Okay.
Um, so I ended up in therapy and my therapist helped me out like so much, and just knowing that it like wasn't my fault, and even though like all I felt was like my body had like betrayed me so many times.
Yeah.
But I had to redeem myself. I had to like know that it like really wasn't just me who had this like bad luck when it came to kids, or births and pregnancies. But after 5 months, or 5 months after my miscarriage, we got pregnant again. And at the 10-week ultrasound, of course, that pregnancy was just completely filled with anxiety, a lot of hope too, and excitement that it was like a rainbow baby coming and that, we were doing this again. But a lot of fear about like what to decide for birth. Like, do we take the chance? I had so many people telling me that the cord being so short was like so rare that there was like basically no way that that's going to happen again, and that the safest was to try to have a VBAC again. um of course the healing from my VBAC was like so intense, but it was also because it was a very unique situation in which I tore a whole lot more than what normal people do. But also because of that, the chances of me tearing severely again are higher because you could tear through your scars. So a mix between the thought of having to have that type of healing again and that type of pain again, and more than anything, just not having like there was no way that I was going to put another baby through what my baby had gone through. And so um, to me it was a no-brainer to decide to have a C-section, because again, I had no idea if his cord being short was some sort of genetic thing that like we do carry. And so
Hmm.
yes, it's such a rare instance, but like maybe it's not so rare for me, you
Hmm.
know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's rare like in the population. That's not something that happens very often, but maybe it would be for me. And I couldn't take that chance again. So I knew that I wanted to have a C-section. And once I like that decision was officially made, it was it was like another big weight off my shoulders to be like, okay, like I know that no, like either way for me it's going to be painful. But this way I know that my baby will come out safe, and that things can be like planned and prepared, and like there's less variables of like random stuff that can happen that could go wrong. I felt like that was like the one way that I could have control in the midst of like how much chaos had happened before with the birds and the miscarriage and like my mental state. That was like the way that I needed to have that control for this birth, even though it's completely out of my hands because it's not like I'm the one doing the surgery, but it felt that way to me. So when I was 10 weeks at the 10-week ultrasound, we found out we had a subchorionic hematoma. And that was that just added so much more anxiety to my to my pregnancy, because we were thinking and expecting that they would be bleeding and having a higher chance of miscarriage. And so I spent the first 20 or so week of my pregnancy just like so anxious and so scared. Thankfully, there was no bleeding and nothing actually came of it, and it went away on its own, which is good. And then came his birth. So I was scheduled to have a C-section on a Thursday. And on Monday, I started having contractions. So he decided to come sooner. He had his own plans. Um, so I started having contractions, and they were really close together right away, like 2 3 minutes apart, like as soon as the first one hit. So I knew that this one was going to be a little bit faster. And I was so scared because I started having contractions at a restaurant, and I had planned the C-section, and I knew that you're not supposed to eat before surgery, but I started having contractions like mid dinner, and I was terrified that I was not going to be allowed to have a C-section
Oh,
because
no.
I was eating. I was like, oh no, like I'm, this baby decided to show up and I'm eating, my stomach is full of food, and now I'm not going to get to have surgery. But because it was all planned, like we had, even though it didn't come on the same the planned date, we had so much stuff planned. We had music planned. We had this, the speaker ready and the playlist, and I had planned everything that I wanted to bring to the hospital to make it more comfortable for me and for my husband, and everything was ready. So even though he came early, things were still ready. And I called my midwife. She met me at the hospital, and she was like, oh, no, don't worry. You can still have your C-section, even though you ate. We'll just give you extra like nausea medication, and everything will be fine. So it went really smooth. I labored, I think, for a total of 5 hours with him. And then later, apparently, I found out that laboring releases all these like really great hormones in your body that are super good for your baby. So I'm actually
Mhm.
really happy that I got to labor and then have my planned C-section. So
Yes.
that worked out really well because that is exactly what he needed. And yeah, we were in the hospital. They prepared me for surgery. I was having contractions, which felt really intense, but like really manageable. I hadn't gotten to, I think they checked me, I was like at 7 centimeters. So I was getting there. It was intense, but I knew that the end was coming. And so I feel like maybe having less stress, not knowing how long labor was going to take, like that sometimes can maybe stress out your contractions and make them feel worse because you just don't know how long, like when is this going to end.
Right.
I think that knowing that it was coming to an end soon helped me like relax and like breathe through my contractions a lot better. So that felt really healing too, because even though I was hurting so bad, I felt really strong, like in being able to handle my contractions. And then I went in for the surgery. I had this really big contraction right before I sat on the table. And then my midwife looked at me. Think my midwife was able to assist in the C-section, so she was able to be there too. And she looked over at me and she said, "That's the last contraction you're gonna feel." And I was like, "Wait, what? Like seriously?" With the epidural, I don't know if you had epidurals, but it takes a while to kick in. And so they give you the epidural, and you still have contractions until it like really kicks in. With the spinal, uh, it doesn't take a while. It's like instant. And so when she was like, "This is the last contraction you're gonna feel," I was like so excited. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna meet my baby. No more pain. This is the best. They did the spinal on me. It feels like getting like hot water poured down your legs. It's a weirdest feeling. And then as soon as they put the shot in, I could feel that they laid me down immediately. Within like 2 minutes, I had like no feeling of anything like below, like halfway through my belly. And then they began surgery. It took a little bit longer than my first because they were going through scar tissue, but still within like 15 minutes, he was out. And we had music and we were talking the whole time. My husband came in and he was taking videos and photos, and it just felt so peaceful that we were not afraid of anything. Yes, we were in the OR, but like everything's going smooth. We're having conversations with the doctor and the midwife, and I'm singing to the songs that we had on the playlist, and everything was great. And then they lifted him up, and I saw him, and he was just perfect. And they also, during my first C-section, they for some, I don't know, I never thought of asking, but they didn't let me hold him while I was in surgery. And so my husband got to hold him, and then I didn't get to hold him until I was all stitched up. But with this surgery, we had planned that I would do skin to skin in the OR. And so they took him out, cleaned him up a little bit, and then put him on my chest. And so the whole time that I was getting stitched up, didn't even care about anything. Like I wasn't even paying attention that I was in an OR. Like the lights weren't bothering me. Nothing was bothering me because he was on my chest and I could feel him breathing on me and his, little newborn smell. It's just the best. Um, and so I think that's why, I, like I mentioned before, I didn't get like the birth that I thought I always wanted, but that was exactly what I needed. Like ending that that way with like, it doesn't matter that I didn't get to push him out, it doesn't matter that I um you know didn't get to feel like a badass and handle the pain and feel everything, and it didn't matter that I couldn't get up and walk right away. Like none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered is that like there was no fear, there was no stress, there was no pain for anybody. There was no complications of any kind. He came out and he was on my chest and he didn't leave my side again until now. He almost never leaves my side. Um, and it was exactly what I needed. That's how I had hoped to feel after all my births. I had hoped to just be like, yes, everything's fine. And there was nothing that happened that was bad, It
Did
was
you
perfect.
guys think to check his cord? I'm just so curious.
They did, yes. Actually, I have my husband was able to take a little video of his birth, and you can hear the OB saying it was a perfectly long cord, because she knew
Wow.
that I was really worried about that.
Uh-huh.
Because I think that both her and the midwife had encouraged me to have a VBAC again,
Mhm.
or had mentioned that they thought that I could and wanted to have me not afraid of having a VBAC, but so they knew that I was really afraid of his cord being short, but they checked it and it was a normal, perfectly long cord. I still don't know how long my first one was, but I'm assuming that they would have mentioned maybe if it had been really short. So maybe his was normal too. I don't know.
Wow. Wow, Anna, before we started recording, I said to you that I was really curious to hear your story because you mentioned having a healing cesarean. And for me, that's so hard to wrap my head around, partly because I listen to so many traumatic cesarean birth stories on this podcast.
Mhm.
But after hearing you tell your story, I completely get it, and I'm so happy that you got the experience that you needed. I mean, I can just hear in your story how
Thank you.
true that is for you, and I'm just so glad that you got that.
Thank you. Yeah. I was telling you before that I sometimes still to this day like have a little bit of like envy towards women who are able to have these like beautiful births. And I even heard of this woman giving birth to twins at home, and I was like, oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
um and of course, part of me still like kind of wishes that that would have been me, but that last um the last experience was, it was exactly what I needed to be at peace with like my all of my motherhood experiences before.
Yeah.
Also because he was my rainbow baby, and I think that that was also like really really healing for my heart in that way, because I saw my baby, and I had this like really, I had this like hole in my heart from the baby that I lost. And I had so much anxiety during my pregnancy that this baby wouldn't make it too. And so getting to like see him and like hearing him cry and everything, I was like, oh yes. Okay, I saw him, he's out, he's great. um and he also, I think that he has been the perfect healing baby as well, because he's just the nicest, sweetest, easiest baby that you can ever imagine. He's 2
Oh.
now, and he is just so chill, like never cries for any reason. He's always down to do whatever. He's always smiling. He is barely just starting to talk, and all he says all the time is that he's happy because it's
Oh.
like anytime that you're like, "Hi, how are you?" He's like, "Happy,
Oh,
happy,"
that's
all
so
the time,
precious.
and that just describes his personality perfect. So I think that was also really um, exactly what we needed to end it with. And we've talked about the possibility of having more kids, and I just keep thinking like I had such a good ending with that last one. We gotta just keep it at that. I think
Mm,
that's exactly how I described like the redemption birth. It was like the thing that like redeemed me, and like how I felt about my body betraying me, and I don't feel like that anymore. That's exactly what I needed to feel, and I don't think that I need to take any more chances.
beautiful. Anna, thank you so much for sharing your story with me. It really, really
Thank
touched
you.
my heart.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this, and I'm really happy that I got to share my experiences, and hopefully it can help somebody if they're going through something scary too. To I don't know, maybe if not feel alone.
Definitely. Thank you, Anna. I'm going to end the recorded part of our podcast there.
Okay.
Ooh, you like took me on a roller coaster. My heart is so touched by your story. Thank you so much for sharing it with me. It really, really did touch my heart. Um,
Yeah.
and I always ask for a photo. If you have a photo that you would be comfortable sharing, um, that would be great if you could email it to me or send it via Instagram, whatever's easiest for you.
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome. Um, and I guess the last thing to say is just that when I air this, I'll send you an email with links. And I can't always. Did you find me on Instagram? Is that how we connected?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your
Yeah.
Instagram?
It's AnaLampWoman.
Okay.
Just yeah.
Like your email?
AnaLampWoman. And the email is same thing except at gmail.com. Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes it's just hard. I don't know. Something about Instagram is hard for me to like find people. But when I share it, I'll tag you so that you know it's live and all that stuff.
Perfect. Oh,
Yeah, I
I
can't
can't wait.
wait.
Thank you so much.
I can't wait to share the story. It's honestly, I mean, despite everything that you went through, it's such a great story. And I really think this is going to touch people's hearts. And you're right. There's going to be someone that had an experience like yours that's going to feel so much less alone and maybe validated for their choices. Yeah, I think it's a very important story to share. And I'm very honored that you trusted me with it. So thank you,
Thank you.
Anna.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Enjoy
I
that
do.
precious little boy. He sounds
Thank
so
you.
cute.
Thank you so much. I think the picture I'll send you will be maybe one with the three boys so you can see
Perfect.
what they look like.
That's perfect. Oh, I can't wait to see them. I bet they're gorgeous. Just
They
like
are
you.
pretty cute. I might be biased, but they are.
Okay. Well, yeah, I can't wait to see that. Thank you, Anna. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. It was really nice to talk to you.
You
Talk to you.
too. Bye.
Bye.